The soft hum of the Boeing 737's engines was a familiar lullaby to Dr. Lena Adebayo, a sound of progress, of moving towards the future. But on this crisp autumn morning aboard Orion Air Flight 1 from JFK to London, that soothing sound would become the backdrop to a confrontation that would echo far beyond the confines of the first-class cabin. It began with a simple request, a demand dripping with the kind of acidic privilege that curdles the air. A wealthy passenger clad in a fortress of designer labels decided that Lena's presence in seat 2B was an inconvenience. Little did she know she wasn't just talking to another passenger. She was challenging a woman whose intellect helped keep these very planes in the sky. And in a twist of fate, the owner of the entire airline was about to take the seat right beside them. The Orion Air First Class lounge at JFK's Terminal 4 was an oasis of curated calm. Soft jazz notes mingled with the distant, almost imperceptible roar of jets taking flight. The air smelled of freshly brewed Ethiopian coffee, expensive leather, and the faint, clean scent of floor polish. Dr. Lena Adebayo sat in a plush armchair by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her gaze fixed on the ballet of ground crews and taxiing aircraft on the tarmac below. She was not a woman who reveled in luxury for its own sake. For her, the lounge was a practical necessity, a quiet space to review her presentation one last time. In her lap sat a sleek carbon fiber laptop displaying complex fluid dynamics simulations. The equations and multicolored pressure gradients on the screen represented the culmination of 2 years of her life's work, Project Nightingale. It was a revolutionary redesign of the turbine blades for Orion Air's new fleet, promising a 7% reduction in fuel consumption and a significant decrease in noise pollution. It was her baby, and in 6 hours, she would be presenting the final viability report to the Orion Air Executive Board in London, including the company's enigmatic founder. Lena, at 38, possessed a quiet intensity that often made people underestimate her. Dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored navy blue pantsuit and a soft silk blouse, she wore no flashy jewelry, only a classic watch with a leather band and a simple silver ring. Her hair was styled in intricate micro-braids, pulled back into an elegant low bun. She projected an aura of serene focus, a woman perfectly comfortable in her own skin and confident in her own intellect. The serene atmosphere was suddenly punctured by a voice, sharp and loud, slicing through the quiet murmurs of the lounge. "No, Bradley. I don't care what the analysts are saying. Liquidate the position. My gut tells me the market is about to turn. It's the same gut feeling I had about that dreadful little gallery in Soho, and you know how that turned out." Lena's eyes flickered from her screen towards the source of the disruption. A woman in her late 50s with a helmet of perfectly coiffed blonde hair was pacing near the bar, one hand gesturing wildly, while the other held a diamond-encrusted phone to her ear. She was a walking billboard for luxury brands, a Chanel tweed jacket that screamed its own price tag, a large Hermès Birkin bag, placed possessively on the adjacent seat, and shoes with soles so red they looked like they'd been dipped in blood. This was Tiffany Harrington. Even if one didn't know her name, her type was instantly recognizable. She spoke with an air of absolute certainty, as if her opinions were established facts, and the rest of the world was simply slow to catch up. "Just do it," she snapped into the phone, her voice laced with impatience. "My husband Robert may have built Harrington Holdings, but I'm the one who keeps it from sinking under the weight of his safe investments. Call me when it's done." She ended the call with a percussive tap on the screen, and let out a theatrical sigh, surveying the lounge, as if looking for a new subject to conquer. Her eyes briefly swept over Lena, a flicker of something disdain, perhaps, or simple incomprehension before moving on. To Tiffany Harrington, the world was a hierarchy, and she had long ago decided she was at its apex. A black woman, deeply engrossed in what looked like complex scientific data, simply didn't register in her established order of things, not in a first-class lounge. She was an anomaly, and Tiffany Harrington did not like anomalies. Lena ignored her, turning her attention back to her work. She had encountered countless Tiffany Harringtons in her life, in academia, in corporate boardrooms, in grocery stores. They were a constant, a background radiation of entitlement she had learned to shield herself from. Reacting to them was a waste of energy, and Lena's energy was a precious resource reserved for solving problems that mattered, like making a 300-ton metal bird fly more efficiently across the ocean. Soon the boarding announcement for Flight 101 to London Heathrow echoed softly through the lounge. The exclusive pre-boarding for our first-class guests. Tiffany Harrington immediately snapped her purse shut and stood moving towards the gate with the determined gait of someone who believed the world should part before her, like the Red Sea. Lena took a slow, deep breath, saved her work, and shut her laptop. She gathered her carry-on, a simple and practical leather satchel containing her life's work, and followed at a measured pace. As she walked down the jet bridge, the anticipation of the meeting hummed within her. This project was more than a career milestone. It was a chance to make a tangible, positive impact on an industry she loved. Nothing she thought could possibly sour this moment. She was wrong. The storm was not on the weather radar. It was waiting for her in seat 3A. The first-class cabin of the Orion Air Boeing 707 was a sanctuary of privacy and comfort. The suites were arranged in a 1-2-1 configuration, each a self-contained pod, with lie-flat seats, polished wood grain finishes, and personal entertainment screens the size of small televisions. Lena found her seat 2B, an aisle seat in the center column. She preferred the aisle. It gave her a sense of freedom, an easy path to stretch her legs on the long transatlantic flight. She stowed her satchel in the overhead bin, placed her laptop case carefully in the footwell, and settled into the plush leather seat. She was just about to pull out a novel when a shadow fell over her. It was Tiffany Harrington. She was standing in the aisle, her arms crossed, her Birkin bag dangling from her wrist like a weapon. Her perfectly made-up face was contorted into a mask of polite yet firm disapproval. "Excuse me," Tiffany said, her voice dripping with condescension. Lena looked up. "Yes? I think there's been a mistake. You're in my seat." Lena maintained her calm demeanor. She glanced at her boarding pass, resting on the small cocktail table beside her. "I don't believe so. My pass says 2B. Tiffany scoffed a small, ugly sound. "That can't be right. I am in 3A, she said, pointing to the window seat just behind Lena's row. "And my husband. Well, he was supposed to be with me, but he was held up his seat as 2B. This one." She gestured vaguely at Lena's seat. "We always book these 2 seats. I need the space for my things." Lena could see the lie forming in Tiffany's eyes. It was a poorly constructed, lazy lie, born from the assumption that it would not be questioned. "Ma'am, this is seat 2B, Lena stated calmly, gesturing to the illuminated number on the wall of the suite. "Perhaps you should check your boarding pass for 3A. Tiffany's polite facade began to crack, revealing the raw entitlement beneath. "I know what my seat is," she snapped. "My point is, I require this adjacent space. It would be much more convenient if you were to move." Move where exactly? Lena asked, her voice still even. I don't know. Tiffany waved a dismissive hand. Anywhere. I saw some empty seats in the back of the cabin. I'm sure one of those would be perfectly adequate for you. The implication hung poisonously in the air. Adequate for you. Lena had heard that tone her entire life. It was the tone of a gatekeeper, someone who believed they had the authority to decide who belonged and who didn't. This is the seat I selected and paid for, Lena said, her patience beginning to fray at the edges. I'm not going to move. Just then, a young, earnest-looking flight attendant named Daniel approached, his smile professionally plastered on his face. Is there a problem here, ladies? Tiffany immediately turned on him, her voice transforming into that of a deeply wronged victim. Yes, there is a problem. This woman, she said, refusing to make eye contact with Lena, is in my husband's seat and is refusing to move. I am a Platinum Medallion million-miler member with this airline, and I expect a certain level of service. Daniel looked from Tiffany's indignant face to Lena's composed one. He glanced at Lena's boarding pass. Ma'am, he said to Lena, your pass says 2B. You're in the correct seat. He then turned to Tiffany. And Mrs. Harrington, I see you are in 3A. May I help you get settled? You're not listening to me. Tiffany's voice rose, turning heads across the cabin. I need this seat next to me to be empty. For my things, for my comfort. I fly this route twice a month. Surely my loyalty means something. She can move. Daniel was clearly out of his depth. He was trained in safety procedures and customer service, not in dismantling decades of baked-in privilege. Ma'am, I can't ask another paying passenger to give up her first-class seat. The cabin is fully booked. There are no other seats available. Then make one available, Tiffany demanded. Upgrade someone from business class and move her there. I don't care how you do it. Just get her out of my sight. The words "get her out of my sight" were delivered with such venom that Daniel visibly flinched. The subtext was now the main text. This wasn't about a seat anymore. It was about who Tiffany Harrington felt was worthy of occupying the space near her. Lena slowly stood up, her 5'9" frame, drawing her level with Tiffany. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and clear, cutting through Tiffany's histrionics. Let me be perfectly clear, Lena said, looking directly into Tiffany's eyes. You are in seat 3A. I am in seat 2B. I will not be moving to the back of the cabin. I will not be moving to business class. I will be sitting right here in the seat assigned to me. You will go to your seat, and that will be the end of this conversation. Do you understand? For a moment, Tiffany was stunned into silence by Lena's directness. No one, it seemed, spoke to Tiffany Harrington that way. Her face flushed a dangerous shade of red. How dare you? She hissed, her voice trembling with rage. Do you have any idea who I am? Who my husband is. I will have your name, and you... She snarled, turning back to the terrified Daniel. I will have your job. Get your purser. Get the captain. Get someone down here who can handle this right now. The cabin, once a haven of tranquility, was now the stage for a drama of pure, uncut entitlement. Passengers were peering over the tops of their suites, their expressions a mixture of shock, disgust, and morbid curiosity. Daniel, pale and sweating, stammered, Yes, ma'am. Right away. And scurried off towards the galley, leaving Lena and Tiffany locked in a silent, tense standoff in the middle of the aisle. Lena simply held her ground, a pillar of calm against a hurricane of irrational fury. The 10 minutes that followed felt like an eternity. Tiffany Harrington stood her ground in the aisle, a self-appointed sentinel of her own perceived importance. She refused to sit, refused to move effectively, holding the final stages of boarding hostage. She had taken out her phone again and was speaking in loud, aggrieved tones. "Robert, you will not believe the incompetence on this airline. Yes, Orion Air. I know you play golf with their CFO. What's his name? Peterson. Well, you can tell Mr. Peterson that their staff is letting just anyone into first class these days, and then they refuse to deal with the situation. No, she's being utterly belligerent. Unbelievable." Each word was a carefully chosen projectile aimed not just at her husband on the other end of the line, but at Lena, who had retaken her seat and was now calmly trying to read her book, refusing to give Tiffany the satisfaction of a reaction. But Lena heard it all. The dog whistle of just anyone was as loud as a siren to her ears. It was a classic tactic frame, the victim as the aggressor, paint a picture of oneself as the besieged party, and leverage connections to crush any opposition. Daniel returned this time with the flight's purser, a stern-looking woman named Susan, with silver hair, pulled into a tight chignon. Susan's expression was one of weary experience. She had clearly dealt with her share of Tiffany Harrington's. "Mrs. Harrington." Susan began, her voice firm but professional. "I am the purser on this flight. Daniel has explained the situation. I must insist that you take your seat. We cannot delay departure. I will take my seat when this passenger is removed from the seat adjacent to mine," Tiffany retorted, gesturing a thumb towards Lena without looking at her. "I have made my request perfectly clear. I am a valued customer. My husband is Robert Harrington of Harrington Holdings. We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars with this airline." "This person," she finally spat, "is a nobody. A simple cost-benefit analysis should make your decision very easy." Lena closed her book, the quiet snap echoing in the tense cabin. She looked at Susan. For the record, she said, her voice steady and clear, "I am Dr. Lena Adebayo, and I am not a nobody. I am a passenger who has paid for this seat and expects to be able to sit in it without being harassed." Susan gave Lena a brief apologetic nod before turning her full attention back to the problem at hand. "Mrs. Harrington, your status and your husband's business are appreciated. However, they do not give you the right to displace other passengers. We have a manifest. Dr. Adebayo is ticketed for seat 2B. You are ticketed for 3A. It is a matter of airline and federal aviation policy. Now please take your seat." The mention of policy and federal regulations seemed to momentarily pierce Tiffany's armor of privilege. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face, but it was quickly replaced by renewed indignation. "This is absurd. You are choosing to protect her over me. This is the worst customer service I have ever experienced. I will be writing letters. I will be making calls. My husband will hear of this. Your entire company will hear of this." The standoff was reaching a critical point. The cabin doors needed to be closed. The captain's voice came over the intercom, a calm, authoritative baritone. "Flight attendants, please prepare for departure." Susan's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Harrington, this is your final warning. Either you take your assigned seat, or you will be deplaned. The captain has been informed of the disturbance, and he will not hesitate to have you removed by airport security." The threat was real. Being forcibly removed from a flight was the ultimate humiliation, a story that would surely get back to her social circle. Tiffany's face paled slightly. The gears were turning in her head, calculating the potential damage to her reputation versus the indignity of backing down. She looked at Lena, who met her gaze with unwavering calm. It was this calmness, this refusal to be intimidated, that seemed to infuriate Tiffany the most. Defeated, but not silenced. Tiffany let out a frustrated growl. "Fine," she snapped, "but I will be filing a formal complaint, and I expect to be compensated for this emotional distress." "I want your name and his," she said, pointing a trembling finger at Daniel. "My name is Susan, and this is Daniel," the purser replied evenly. "We will be happy to provide our employee numbers after the flight. Now please, your seat." With one last withering glare at Lena Tiffany Harrington, finally moved. She stomped the few feet to her suite 3A and slammed her Birkin bag onto the seat with a thud. She sank into the chair, crossing her arms tightly, radiating a palpable aura of fury. Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Susan gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder and walked back to the galley. The cabin slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy as the crew completed their final checks. Lena leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. The confrontation had left a bitter taste in her mouth. It was exhausting, this constant need to justify her existence, to stand firm against a tide of prejudice that assumed she was lesser, that her space was negotiable. She had won the battle, but the war she knew was far from over. She opened her eyes, ready to put the incident behind her and focus on the important work ahead. But the drama of Flight 101 was not over. In fact, the most crucial player had not even taken the stage yet. Just as the flight attendants were about to secure the main cabin door, a frazzled-looking gate agent appeared, speaking in hushed, urgent tones to Susan the purser. A moment later, Susan's voice came over the cabin's PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the slight delay. We are just waiting for one final passenger to board. We should be on our way shortly." A collective quiet groan rippled through the cabin. Tiffany Harrington in seat 3A rolled her eyes so dramatically it was a performance in itself. "Unbelievable," she muttered loudly to no one in particular. "First the seating fiasco, now this." A few moments later, an elderly man appeared at the entrance to the jet bridge. He looked to be in his early 70s, with a shock of unruly white hair. Kind eyes behind a pair of simple, wire-rimmed glasses, and a face etched with the lines of a life well lived. He was dressed in a comfortable but unassuming tweed blazer, a worn V-neck sweater over a collared shirt and corduroy trousers. He carried no fancy luggage, just a battered leather briefcase that had clearly seen decades of use. He looked more like a retired university professor than a first-class passenger. He walked down the aisle, his steps a little slow but steady, a gentle, apologetic smile on his face. "So sorry, everyone," he murmured as he passed. "Meeting ran late." He paused at Lena's row, consulting a crumpled boarding pass he pulled from his jacket pocket. He looked at the seat numbers, then at the empty seat next to Lena. Seat 2A, the window seat in the center column. Then his gaze fell upon Tiffany Harrington, who had chosen to stow her enormous Birkin bag, a cashmere wrap, and a stack of magazines squarely on that very seat. The man offered Tiffany a polite smile. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice pleasant and raspy. "I believe that's my seat you've covered with your belongings." Tiffany looked up at him, her expression shifting from general annoyance to pointed disdain. She sized him up in a single dismissive glance, the rumpled clothes, the lack of designer logos, the aged briefcase. He did not pass her rigorous vetting process for people deserving of her respect. "The cabin is full," she declared flatly, as if she were the ultimate authority on the matter. "There must be a mistake." "I don't think so," the man said patiently, holding up his boarding pass. "It says 2A right here. Arthur Finch. Tiffany didn't even bother to look at it. Well, Arthur, she said, mimicking his tone, as you can see, I am using this space. The flight attendants were completely useless in handling my earlier seating issue, so I've had to make my own arrangements. You'll have to find somewhere else to sit. The sheer audacity of the statement was breathtaking. She was now attempting to deny a ticketed passenger his assigned seat, a seat she had moments ago been furious about not having for herself. The old man. Arthur blinked slowly, a flicker of amused disbelief in his eyes. I'm afraid it doesn't quite work that way, he said, his gentle demeanor still intact. That's my seat. I've flown a long way, and I'm quite tired. I'd very much like to sit in it. This was the final straw for Tiffany. First, she had been forced to sit near a woman she deemed unworthy. Now she was being challenged by a man she judged to be her social and financial inferior. Look, she sighed, her voice dripping with exasperation, as if explaining a complex concept to a simple-minded child. I am a Platinum Medallion member. I am accustomed to a certain level of comfort. I need this space. There is no other seat. Find a jump seat. Talk to the captain, I don't care, but you are not sitting here. At this, Lena, who had been watching the exchange in stunned silence, finally intervened. Ma'am, she said, turning to face Tiffany. You cannot be serious. You just spent 15 minutes creating a scene because you felt entitled to a space that wasn't yours. Now you are doing the exact same thing to this gentleman. He has a boarding pass for that seat. Move your things. Tiffany whirled on Lena. You stay out of this. This has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me when it's happening 2 feet away. Lena countered, her voice sharp with a new edge of frustration. Arthur Finch looked from Tiffany's enraged face to Lena's strong, defiant one. A small, thoughtful frown creased his brow. He seemed less interested in the argument itself and more interested in the characters of the people involved. He turned to Daniel, the young flight attendant, who had rushed over at the first sign of a new conflict. Young man, Arthur said, his voice quiet, but carrying an unmistakable note of authority. Could you please ask this lady to remove her possessions from my seat so that I may sit down? We are delaying the flight. Daniel, looking as though he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth, swallowed hard. Mrs. Harrington, he pleaded. Please, you must move your bag. This is Mr. Finch's seat. I will not, she shrieked, clutching the Birkin bag to her chest like a shield. This is harassment. I am being harassed by everyone on this plane. The situation had spiraled from drama into utter farce. But the twist that was about to unfold would turn the entire narrative on its head. For Arthur Finch was not just any elderly passenger, and his name, which meant nothing to Tiffany Harrington, was about to mean everything to the crew of Orion Air Flight 101. As Tiffany Harrington's shrieks of harassment echoed in the now silent cabin, Daniel, the flight attendant, felt a cold dread wash over him. His eyes darted from Tiffany's furious face to the calm, waiting visage of the old man. Then his training kicked in. He had to verify the passenger's identity and ticket. Mr. Finch, sir, may I see your boarding pass again, please? Daniel asked, his voice trembling slightly. Arthur handed it over. Daniel's eyes scanned the paper, and then they widened. He scanned it again, his mouth falling slightly agape. It wasn't just the name Finch A that caught his attention. It was the booking code next to it, Exec Chair 001. There was only one person on the entire planet with that booking code. Daniel looked up from the boarding pass, his face ashen. He stared at the unassuming old man in the tweed jacket as if seeing him for the first time. The unruly white hair, the gentle eyes, the worn briefcase. It was him. The man from the cover of Forbes and Fortune magazines. The legendary founder and majority shareholder of Orion Air and its parent company, Finch Global. The A stood for Arthur. Arthur Finch. He was the airline's owner. Daniel's professionalism, which had been battered and bruised by Tiffany Harrington, suddenly snapped back into place, reinforced by a jolt of pure adrenaline and terror. He stood up straight, his posture changing from beleaguered flight attendant to that of a soldier addressing a 5-star general. "Mr. Finch," Daniel stammered, his voice barely a whisper, "my sincerest apologies for the delay, and for this inconvenience. Please allow me." He turned to Tiffany, his tone now devoid of any pleading. It was cold, hard, and official. "Ma'am, remove your belongings from seat 2A, now." Tiffany, oblivious to the monumental shift that had just occurred, scoffed. "Oh, so now you've found your spine. It doesn't matter. I told you he's not." She was cut off by Susan the purser, who had hurried over after seeing the look on Daniel's face. Daniel quickly and discreetly showed her the boarding pass. Susan's eyes went wide, and for the first time that day, her mask of unflappable composure slipped. She paled, taking a sharp breath. She looked at Arthur Finch with a reverence that was borderline fearful. "Mr. Finch," Susan said, her voice filled with a mixture of shock and mortification. "Welcome aboard. We weren't expecting you on this flight. I am so terribly sorry for this entire situation." The use of his full name, spoken with such deference by the purser, finally seemed to penetrate Tiffany's bubble of self-importance. She looked from Susan's horrified face to Daniel's terrified one, and then to the old man Arthur. The pieces began to click into place in her mind, forming a picture of catastrophic misjudgment. Finch. Finch. As in Finch Global. As in the name emblazoned on the very tail of the plane she was sitting on. Her face, which had been flushed with rage, drained of all color. She looked as if she'd seen a ghost. The Hermes bag suddenly felt very heavy in her lap. Arthur Finch offered Susan a small, weary smile. "It's quite all right, Susan. It was a last-minute change. No need for apologies from you or your crew. You've all been very professional under trying circumstances." His eyes flickered meaningfully towards Tiffany. He then turned his attention back to his seat, still occupied by Tiffany's luxury clutter. He didn't need to say a word. Tiffany, her hands trembling, scrambled to gather her things. The cashmere wrap, the magazines, the ridiculously oversized bag, all were hastily swept into her own suite 3A, with the frantic energy of someone trying to hide evidence. Finally, seat 2A was clear. But Arthur Finch didn't sit down. Instead, he looked at Lena. A genuine warm smile spread across his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Dr. Adebayo," he said, his voice full of warmth and respect. "I was so hoping I'd catch you before the board meeting. I wanted to tell you in person how much I'm looking forward to your presentation on Project Nightingale. The preliminary data is nothing short of revolutionary." Lena, who had figured out who he was the moment Susan spoke his name, smiled back. "Mr. Finch, it's an honor. I didn't realize we'd be on the same flight." Tiffany Harrington, now crammed into her seat and trying to appear invisible, felt a fresh wave of nausea. Dr. Adebayo. Doctor. The woman she had dismissed as a nobody and tried to banish to the back of the plane was not only known by the owner of the airline, but was clearly a VIP he held in high esteem. Arthur's gaze then softened. "I am so sorry you had to endure that unpleasantness," he said, his voice low enough that only Lena could hear. "It was unacceptable." He then looked at the two empty seats in the center column, 2A and 2B. He turned back to Lena with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Doctor," he said, his voice now returning to a normal volume for all to hear, "I find I'm a bit stiff today. I'd much prefer the aisle seat if you don't mind. It's easier on my old knees." He gestured to her seat 2B. "Would you do me the honor of taking my window seat 2A? I'd very much enjoy having you next to me. We could discuss the project." It was a masterful move, layered with meaning. On the surface, it was a simple, polite request from an old man. But everyone in the cabin who had witnessed the earlier drama understood the subtext. He was not only validating Lena completely, but he was also giving her the very thing Tiffany had tried to deny her, a place of honor and respect. He was seating her beside him, the most powerful man on the plane, in a gesture of solidarity and admiration. He was also subtly maneuvering her away from being directly in front of the toxic presence of Tiffany Harrington. "Of course, Mr. Finch," Lena replied, her voice gracious. "I'd be happy to." With quiet dignity, Lena gathered her book and her laptop case and moved into the window seat 2A. Arthur Finch then settled into her old seat 2B, placing his worn briefcase at his feet. They were now seated side by side, a portrait of mutual respect and intellectual partnership. The cabin door was sealed. The plane began to push back from the gate. And in seat 3A, Tiffany Harrington sat frozen, trapped in a silent, self-made prison of humiliation, with a 7-hour flight ahead of her to contemplate the full disastrous scope of her actions. The karma had only just begun to circle. As the Boeing 777 ascended through the clouds, leaving the New York skyline behind the atmosphere inside the first-class cabin, shifted. The tense confrontational energy dissipated, replaced by the gentle hum of the engines and the quiet professional movements of the flight crew. For most passengers, it was time to relax, to watch a movie, or enjoy a glass of champagne. But for Tiffany Harrington, the flight had become a slow-motion nightmare. She sat rigidly in her seat, pretending to read a magazine, but her eyes saw nothing on the glossy pages. All of her senses were focused on the two seats in front of her, on the quiet, confident conversation taking place between the unassuming old man and the brilliant black woman she had so grievously misjudged. "The resonance dampeners are the real key," Arthur Lena was saying, her voice animated with passion for her work. She had pulled out a tablet and was showing him a 3D rendered model of a turbine. "By micro-adjusting the composite layering, we not only strengthen the blade against fatigue, but we disrupt the harmonic frequencies that produce the most significant engine whine on approach. It's what makes Nightingale so quiet." Arthur Finch leaned in his expression one of rapt attention. He wasn't a scientist, but he was a brilliant industrialist who understood innovation. So the noise reduction isn't just a happy side effect of the efficiency gains, it's an integral part of the design. Exactly, Lena confirmed. They are two sides of the same coin. A quieter engine is a more stable engine, and a more stable engine is a more efficient one. We're looking at fuel savings that could total over $1 billion for your fleet over the next decade. Not to mention the environmental benefits and the ability to meet stricter noise regulations at airports like Heathrow. Tiffany could not believe what she was hearing. $1 billion. Environmental benefits. This woman wasn't just a passenger. She was a linchpin in the future of the entire airline. The project she was discussing, Project Nightingale, sounded like something that would be front-page news in the Wall Street Journal, and Tiffany had tried to have her thrown off the plane. The conversation continued, flowing easily from complex engineering to shared anecdotes. They talked about Lena's time at MIT, about Arthur's early days starting Orion Air with just 2 leased aircraft, and their shared love for aviation. Their rapport was genuine, a meeting of 2 minds who operated on a level of substance and vision that was utterly alien to Tiffany's world of superficial status symbols and petty power plays. At one point, Susan the purser came by to take their meal orders. She addressed both Lena and Arthur with the same level of profound respect. "Mr. Finch, Dr. Adebayo, may I get you started with something to drink? We have the 2008 Dom Perignon you prefer, sir." "Excellent, Susan. A glass for me and for the doctor as well, if she'd like," Arthur said warmly. "I'd love one." "Thank you," Lena replied with a smile. When Susan reached Tiffany's seat, her demeanor was perfectly professional, but the warmth was gone. It was replaced by a cool, formal efficiency. "Mrs. Harrington, can I get you a drink? I'll have a glass of champagne," Tiffany mumbled, not meeting her eyes. "Of course," Susan replied, her voice clipped. She returned moments later, serving Lena and Arthur, first pouring their champagne with a flourish. When she served Tiffany, the action was perfunctory, swift, and utterly devoid of grace. It was a small thing, but in the world of first-class service, it was a clear and deliberate signal. Tiffany Harrington was no longer a valued guest. She was a problem that had to be managed. The humiliation deepened with every passing minute. She was forced to listen as Arthur Finch personally invited Lena to join him for dinner with the board chairman in London the following evening. She heard him talk about putting a press release together to announce the success of her project, ensuring her name and her team received full credit. "It's innovators like you, Lena, who are the lifeblood of this company," Arthur said, his voice ringing with sincerity. "Not the people who spend the most money, but the people who bring the best ideas. People of character and substance. That's the foundation I built this airline on." The words were not aimed directly at Tiffany, but they struck her with the force of a physical blow. People of character and substance. She had built her entire identity around the opposite, the superficial trappings of wealth, the brute force of her husband's name, the belief that money could buy deference. In the space of an hour, her entire world-view had been dismantled. She saw the way other passengers occasionally glanced her way, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and contempt. She had made herself the villain of the story, a living cliché of the entitled rich woman. The Chanel jacket suddenly felt like a costume, her diamond-encrusted phone a gaudy prop. For the first time in a very long time, Tiffany Harrington felt small. And as the plane sped across the Atlantic, she had the sickening feeling that the consequences of her actions were just beginning to gather momentum. While Lena and Arthur were enjoying their meal, a quiet but significant series of events was set in motion. Arthur Finch did not become a billionaire by being forgetful or overly sentimental. He was a man of action, and he believed that actions both good and bad should have clear and immediate consequences. He excused himself from the conversation with Lena, saying he needed to send a few emails. He connected his laptop to the plane's satellite Wi-Fi, the soft glow of the screen illuminating his determined face. His fingers, gnarled with age, but still nimble, flew across the keyboard. His first email was to the head of Orion Air's loyalty program. Subject, status, revocation, Tiffany Harrington. Act 774B3. Message, effective immediately revoke all status benefits and privileges associated with the account of Tiffany Harrington. Furthermore, flag her profile. She is no longer permitted to fly on Orion Air, effective upon the landing of OA-101. A full report will follow, but the short version is behavior unbecoming of any passenger, let alone one in a premium cabin. Confirm receipt. The response came back in less than 5 minutes. Status revocation. Confirmed. Arthur, consider it done. Sorry you had to deal with this personally. His second email was to the head of corporate security for Orion Air at Heathrow. Subject: escort required. OA101. Arrival message. Please have a security team meet Flight 1001 upon arrival at Terminal 3. They are to escort a passenger, Tiffany Harrington, seat 3A, from the aircraft to landside. She caused a significant disturbance prior to departure, harassing both crew and other passengers. She is to be informed that she is banned from all future travel on our airline due to her behavior. No fuss, just a quiet professional removal. Again, the confirmation was swift. The gears of the corporate machine were turning silently and efficiently. This was the immediate karma, a direct consequence of her actions on the plane. But Arthur Finch wasn't finished. The name Harrington Holdings had been nagging at him. He knew he'd heard it before. He opened a new browser tab and accessed the internal portal for Finch Global, his vast holding company that had interests in everything from aviation to logistics to commercial real estate. He ran a search for Harrington Holdings. The result came up instantly. Harrington Holdings had a lucrative multi-year logistics and warehousing contract with a major subsidiary of Finch Global. The contract, valued at roughly $8 million a year, was up for renewal in 2 months. It was, Arthur noted with a grim sense of irony, one of Robert Harrington's safe investments that Tiffany had so smugly boasted about on the phone in the lounge. Arthur picked up the satellite phone built into his suite. He dialed a number from memory. It was answered on the first ring. "Charles," Arthur said, his voice low but firm. "It's Arthur. I hope I'm not interrupting your evening." "Not at all, Arthur. What can I do for you?" came the voice of Charles Peterson, the chief financial officer of Finch Global, the very man Robert Harrington played golf with. "Charlie, do you know a Robert Harrington Holdings?" "Vaguely," the CFO replied. "Solid mid-level supplier for our European logistics arm. Why do you ask? I've just had the profound displeasure of meeting his wife," Arthur said dryly. "And based on the character she's displayed, I'm no longer comfortable with his company being associated with our brand. I have a zero-tolerance policy for that kind of arrogance and bigotry, whether it's in my boardroom or on my aircraft." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Charles Peterson knew Arthur well enough to know this was not a whim. "Charlie," Arthur continued, "I want you to initiate a review of that contract. I want you to find a new supplier before the renewal date. Find a company whose values align more closely with ours. And when the time comes, I want you to inform Mr. Harrington that we will not be renewing, and you can tell him his wife's behavior on Flight 101 today was the precipitating factor. Sometimes a message needs to be delivered personally." "Understood, Arthur," Charles said, his voice now serious. "I'll get on it first thing in the morning." "Thank you, Charlie." Arthur hung up the phone. He closed his laptop. The entire exchange had taken less than 15 minutes. In that time, he had dismantled Tiffany Harrington's privileged world with a few quiet keystrokes and a single phone call. Her airline status was gone. Her ability to fly with them was gone. And in 2 months, her husband's company would lose a contract worth millions, with a clear explanation as to why. This wasn't just karma. This was a surgical strike aimed directly at the foundations of her entitled life, her status, and her money. Arthur Finch did not believe in loud, theatrical revenge. He believed in quiet, decisive, and irreversible consequences. He turned back to Lena, a serene smile returning to his face. "Now," he said, as if he'd just been checking the weather. "You were telling me about the tensile strength of the new composite material." Tiffany Harrington, sitting behind them, had heard the low murmur of the phone call. She hadn't made out the words, but she saw the look of cold, hard resolution on Arthur Finch's face as he spoke. A shiver of pure, undiluted fear ran down her spine. The air in the first-class cabin suddenly felt very, very cold. The descent into London was smooth. As the plane broke through the thick layer of English clouds, the sprawling city emerged below a tapestry of lights in the fading afternoon. For Lena, the sight was one of promise, the beginning of a pivotal new chapter for her career. For Tiffany Harrington, it was the end of the line. The moment the plane docked at the gate and the seatbelt sign pinged off, the usual bustle of first class began. But before anyone could stand, a crisp official voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you please remain seated for a moment. We need to allow some officials to board the aircraft first. Thank you for your patience." Tiffany's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew. She knew who they were for. 2 men and a woman, all dressed in the sharp, dark uniforms of Heathrow's airport security, and carrying official-looking tablets, boarded the plane. They walked directly to seat 3A. One of the men leaned down, his voice low, but audible to those nearby. "Mrs. Tiffany Harrington." Tiffany could only nod, her throat too dry to speak. "Ma'am, we are here to escort you from the aircraft. Please gather your belongings and come with us." Her face was a mask of sheer horror. This was it. The public humiliation she had desperately tried to avoid was happening in front of everyone. She could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her, including Lena, and worst of all, Arthur Finch. "What is the meaning of this?" She managed to stammer a pathetic echo of her earlier belligerence. "I am a paying passenger. We are acting on the instruction of the airline, ma'am," the security officer said, his voice impassive. "You are to be informed that due to the disturbance you caused before departure, you are permanently banned from flying with Orion Air or any of its partner airlines. Now please, let's not cause any further delay for the other passengers." There was no fight left in her. Trembling, she gathered her things. The bag that was once a symbol of power now felt like a ball and chain, and allowed herself to be led off the plane, a walk of shame down the aisle she had so arrogantly commanded just hours before. She didn't dare look at anyone as she passed. Once she was gone, a palpable sense of relief filled the cabin. Arthur Finch stood up and offered a hand to Lena. "Well, Dr. Adebayo," he said with a warm smile, "shall we go and change the future of aviation?" "It would be my pleasure, Mr. Finch," Lena replied, her own smile genuine and bright. They deplaned together, walking side by side down the jet bridge, 2 brilliant minds engrossed in a conversation about innovation and progress. They were a picture of true power, not the loud, demanding power that Tiffany had wielded, but the quiet, earned power that comes from intelligence, character, and mutual respect. Epilogue. 2 months later. The article appeared on page B4 of the Wall Street Journal. It was a small piece, a minor footnote in the grand scheme of the financial world, but for one family it was an earthquake. Harrington Holdings, stock tumbles after Finch Global terminates key logistics contract. The article detailed the unexpected decision by Finch Global to not renew a lucrative $8 million a year contract with Harrington Holdings, citing a fundamental misalignment of corporate values. The market had reacted swiftly, and Harrington Holdings' stock had plummeted by over 20%. The piece quoted an anonymous source within Finch Global, who stated that the decision was made at the highest level, following a deeply unfortunate personal incident involving a senior executive's family member. In her sprawling Connecticut mansion, Tiffany Harrington read the article, the newspaper shaking in her hands. The fallout had been catastrophic. Her husband, Robert, had been furious not just about the money, but about the public humiliation. The story of her behavior on Flight 101 had spread like wildfire through their social and business circles, whispered at country clubs and over boardroom lunches. The name Harrington, once a symbol of solid old money respectability, was now a punchline. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Dr. Lena Adebayo stood on a wind-swept tarmac next to a brand-new Orion Air jet. The engines, powered by her Nightingale turbine technology, spooled up with a sound that was more of a deep, powerful hum than a roar. Arthur Finch stood beside her, beaming like a proud father. Project Nightingale had been a resounding success, and Lena was now the celebrated head of Orion Air's new Sustainable Aviation R&D division. She had never sought revenge on Tiffany Harrington. She had already forgotten the woman's name. Lena's victory wasn't in Tiffany's downfall, but in her own ascent. She had proven that true worth isn't measured by designer bags or frequent flyer status, but by the content of one's character and the brilliance of one's mind. In the end, the woman who demanded a seat was left with nothing, while the woman who had earned her place was given the chance to redesign the sky. This story is a powerful reminder that the true measure of a person isn't the wealth they display, but the character they reveal under pressure. Dr. Lena Adebayo met arrogance and prejudice not with anger, but with unshakable dignity and grace. And in a world that often feels unjust, the swift, decisive karma that found Tiffany Harrington reminds us that our actions, big and small, have consequences that can ripple out in ways we can never predict. True power lies not in demanding respect, but in commanding it through intelligence, integrity, and quiet confidence. If this story of karmic justice and the triumph of character resonated with you, please help us share it. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more true life stories that will inspire and make you think. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an update. What are your thoughts on how Lena handled the situation? Let us know in the comments below.